Alright, let's talk bosses. So, starting with the one that I think is the easiest, Ziri, and working my way up to the one that I think is the most difficult, the Feared. I'm going to give my best tips as far as how we can mod this specific character to best meet each individual challenge, and provide a couple strategy ideas on each of them. So starting with that Ziri, the first thing to remember is that she reflects damage. So we need Reflect, and we can get it fairly easily through Ugle here. It's being covered up by my active skill, but Ugle provides 50% less reflected elemental damage taken, and then we'll take this elemental mastery here for the rest of it on that mod. The other thing that she does is she reflects curses. So we probably should not curse her with our flammability because we don't want that on us on the off chance that we get hit with that curse and then eat a flame blast. And the reason why that matters, I mean, obviously we want to take less damage, but we can actually tank the flame blast because Ziri can basically be turned back into her normal self with sufficient spell suppression. And I'm going to recommend that we do some gear swap for this. So, as good as our shield is, we're actually going to take it off and put on an evasion-based shield with a spell suppression roll. And that's going to reduce our DPS by a little over 20%. So, but I think it's worth it to not be able to take that damage. So, ideally what we would get is an evasion-based shield that has spell suppression and preferably still a max res roll or a fire max res roll. We can't replace the plus to level of spell gems because that only exists on energy shield only. But that will be my recommendation. So ideally, honestly, we could have spell suppression on a lot of stuff here, but I wanted to present fairly basic gear just for getting to level 90 or slash being at level 90. But it's not too difficult to just roll some basic, sorry, one second, spell suppression gear for the helmet, the gloves, the boots. And remember that on this gear, we're not using it for fighting anything other than a couple bosses. We don't have to worry about chaos res. So the only thing we're looking for is just a spell suppression roll, a life roll, and we can swip that out with our stuff. And that turns that Ziri back to totally normal to what she would be before the Gauntlet. Other than that, she has that 40% haste and more life. But totally normal in terms of the damage. So, at Ziri, I actually think is almost a gimme once you get spell suppression on your gear. Additionally, she doesn't do any cold damage, so we can take off our Purity of Ice and replace it with Skitterbots, or we can put on an Arctic armor to take less physical or fire when we're stationary. Moving on to the Shaper. Here, I don't think we should keep going for spell suppression because it's a little bit harder to achieve, and we would really like the damage against Shaper. He's already a bit of a slog in terms of finishing him off, and we want our +1 levels. So I would recommend just using normal gear for the Shaper. The two things that he does that are dangerous are, one, those accelerating ball attack. He'll shoot 3 balls in quick succession, and they are cold damage with penetration, which is a scary mod for us because we're a max res character, and that's where a lot of our defense against elemental comes from. So what I recommend for the Shaper is, first off, I think you should always have freeze immunity, and we get that just from the Pantheon. Prune of the Challengers in a tier 6 map this league, so it's not hard to get cannot be frozen at all, but also to get chill immunity, or enough stacked reduced effective chill that it doesn't do very much. So example, through getting Captain Tanner Lightfoot, that's in a tier 15 map, so you won't necessarily have that, but just getting it somewhere, getting it on a flask, wherever you can have it. And the reason that you want that is just that if you get hit by the first of those 3 accelerating balls, you're still moving fast enough, and I recommend that you continually move in a circle and just cast damage in, Wave of Conviction, from wherever you're at in that circle. So you ought to still be moving quickly enough with the chill immunity that the first ball doesn't slow you down enough that you end up eating the other 2 as well. And if you just get hit by 1, that should be okay. The other thing to look out for is just the Shaper Slam. He does that on a 15-second cooldown. That's physical. Theoretically, we can actually tank it with the guard skill down. I definitely do not recommend trying to do it. The reason I say theoretically we can tank is my understanding is it hits for about 22,000 plus with the Gauntlet mods, and we can theoretically tank up to 28,000 with guard skill down, but just to be safe, I don't recommend that. For the Elder, coming up next, he doesn't do any fire damage, he doesn't do any lightning damage. So we can take off those auras and swap in Grace or swap in Skitterbots and Unbound Ailments supporting it. I recommend a Sapphire Flask since he has a lot of cold damage abilities and the rest are physical. And don't forget that he is a cheapo after he dies. So remember, the moment he dies, run back under the Zana bubble so you don't get hit with that. Then up to the Awakener, I don't really have any particularly hot tips for him. He does damage of all types. One of the really annoying things about him that I think you need to keep in mind if you get to him is he's still quite glitchy. Even now, he's still quite glitchy. So if you get into that fight and you're having any sort of graphical issues, if you're having any sort of, lag, like little just clips where it's not loading right, you can tell it's not quite right. I can usually tell when it's going to be an issue, and you have to log out. I think you're okay just coming in the first time, but if it's like that and you have to log out for some reason, like you get trapped in the meteor maze or something like that and you have to run away, I recommend not coming back to the fight. Just let it expire and run it again later. And the reason is because when you come back in, often the issues get much worse. So you can be like being targeted by the giant meteor and there's no indication whatsoever and you just get hit by it and it's just out of nowhere. So there's a lot of glitches with it. If you have to log against the Sirius, I would actually just abandon the fight. Mastermind. Actually, Mastermind I should have listed a little bit earlier. She's probably easier than any of the last three I said, but she has no cold damage and no lightning damage, so you can take off Purity of Ice and Purity of Lightning and replace that with Grace or Skitterbots and Unbound Ailments. Apologize for the coughing. You can put on a Basalt and Granite Flask, I would recommend, because she has a lot of physical damage attacks. Probably one of the more dangerous ones for her is when she summons those little green skeletons that are sort of like crawling towards you on the ground. And if they get to you, they pop for a lot of physical damage, so stay aware of that. Don't get caught out by that. Theoretically, I think she ought to be easier for us because we have such good physical mitigation once we have all those physical taken as rolls. But she's a little bit tricky in that she has all those different phases, and I find her a little bit less visually clear than a lot of the other bosses. So still be careful, and keep an eye out for those crawling skeleton guys, because I've been caught by that where I was like, oh, I'm taking a ton of damage. I don't think I've ever actually died to it, but I've come really, really close before. Coming up next, the Maven. So spell suppression is again great for her. I think it probably is worth it even over the level on the shield. I'm not sure if every single one of her attacks is a spell, but very nearly all of them are. So I do think it's worth it for her to get back to full spell suppression. No super hot tips beyond that. On absolutely all of these, if you're not super familiar with the fight, first off, you're in for a really hard time, but I would look it up on YouTube and just watch people doing it. I'm going to link a video of Zizeron doing a whole bunch of the bosses with Gauntlet mods on from the most recent, the league before this one, whose name escapes me, the Crangled Gauntlet. And that one, the monsters had 2 additional projectiles, but it's a really good view of just how fast is this stuff coming out, what does it look like, how bad is the increased area of effect. So I will link that in the description. Next up, Searing Exarch. He doesn't do any lightning or cold, so take off those auras. Skitterbots, Arctic Armor, or Grace. The other tip for him is to run Frostwell with Spell Cascade, and the higher level those are, the better, because it will provide you with more coverage. And I'm really sorry about this coughing, but if I re-record, it's just going to happen again. He's got that big attack where he yells Incinerate that's on a 22-second cooldown. Not that you would ever tank this. You can't even really tank it in normal, even with amazing gear. But just run. And if you realize that you were a little bit slow reacting to it, log out and then just come back. And then when you get in there, just sit there in the grace period. And once that goes off, start running around and continue doing what you were doing before. Eater of Worlds. This one's in some ways kind of nice for us because his debuff decreases your physical damage, reduction, and your evasion, which are two stats that we're not really that dependent on. We use, primarily our physical reduction is physical taken as. Not that you ever want to get too debuffed by him, but it's not quite as painful for us. He doesn't do any fire damage, so we can take off Purity of Fire, replace that with Skitterbots for a bit more damage. Next up, I got the Uber, Elder, Shaper, and at Ziri. I have no particular hot tips for Elder or Shaper other than watch the video of just Ziri doing that with the Gauntlet mods on. It's much the same as the previous fights. Other than that, you can't swap any ores because all the damage types are covered. Ziri, the one change between her and the basic, first off, remember to get your Reflect immunity back on. Is that at this point, I think you need to have bleed immunity just to make sure you don't get hit by those spikes or have it on a flask, just some flask that provides immunity. Because those spears are starting to hit hard enough that it matters at Uberat Ziri for sure. So the invitations, we can do the Detonate Dead trick, actually, even though we're not a Detonate Dead build. And the Detonate Dead trick is that, so for like the Detonate Dead people that are doing that as their main, it's really nice because if they kill one thing, one of the bosses in an invitation and they blow it up, it can one-shot the other bosses, and I'll show why that is. So this is just Detonate Dead on a 5-link. I'm suggesting that we have this on a weapon swap and swap to it after we kill one and blow it up. So you see here it says average hit of 2 million. And this is with the enemy corpse life set to 1 million, actually 999,000, etc. And I only have it set to that because I can't add any more digits in Path of Building. But realistically, so I checked this, for example, against the Minotaur. The Minotaur's enemy corpse life is 34 million. So 34 times what this is. And it really is that simple. So if you look at the average hit, right now this is on 1 million. What if I do 500,000? It's down to 1 million. So it really is just about exactly half. So the default Minotaur life is 34 million, but we're in the Gauntlet, so his life is doubled. That's 68 million. So it's going to be 68 times the average hit for Detonate Dead. And the reason this works so well for us, even though we're not Detonate Dead build, is we still have basically all the fire damage, we got all the elemental damage, we have all the stuff that sort of goes into doing a great Detonate Dead pop. So if you're in an invitation and you've got one down, I think it's worth keeping this on a weapon swap and blowing that boss up to get rid of the other 3. As far as the invitations, first off, I suggest you have an option on this one, the Elder Slayers or the Twisted. I would say the Twisted is somewhat easier, so I would target that. In the order in which I would try and kill them is to prioritize first the Eradicator, followed by the Enslaver in that order of priority, because you don't know what order they're going to be released in, but Eradicator is the top priority, followed by Enslaver. On the Formed, I would target the Hydra, followed by the Minotaur. On Hidden, I would target Esh, followed by Ulnatal, because they're the ones that make the arena so difficult to navigate. Esh throws out all those lightning bolts you have to go around, and Ulnatal makes all the spikes, which are quite obnoxious. And then on the Feared, my top tip is to cry, try not to cry, and then cry a lot. Actually, that's a pretty good tip for all the invitations. But in all seriousness, I would target at Ziri first if you can get her, followed by the Synthete, also known as the Cortex boss, followed by Elder. If you're ever in a situation where you're in the Elder circle, that explosion thing where you have to be in the middle, I'm so sorry. And the black ball, so chasing you from the Cortex attack, I would log there no matter what. Don't try and kite it, just get out. One thing to remember is when the Cortex boss spawns, that's the Synthete, his spawn animation takes forever. So if he's one of the first 2 that spawn, I would target the other one and try and get that one lower before you switch over to the Cortex, even though I consider the Cortex guy a high priority kill, because otherwise you'll be sitting there waiting for him to finish his animation before you can even hurt him. Didn't expect to be so emotional, sniff sniff. But seriously, I wish you guys the absolute best of luck. even just getting to level 95, and I do recommend leveling all the way up before you do the bosses, um, which may sound obvious, but I'm not actually sure was always the case because random trash can kill you almost easier than bosses, I think, sometimes. But with the added 100% unique monster life, I do think you should just level up to 95 first. Just getting to this stage is an achievement, so congratulate yourself on that, first of all. Um, oh, one more thing I forgot to mention. So once you are done with that Ziri, I would switch the Pantheon, especially in the Shaper Elder Awakener fights, which can go for a while, to Rislasha, so you're getting those life flask charges and increased life gain. Okay, that was the last tip for the bosses. If you have any questions about this or about any of my builds or any of that, please don't hesitate to reach out and ask. This is going to be my last video before the Gauntlet. I do have some personal stuff I have to take care of concurrent with the early days of the Gauntlet, but I do hope to still get in both like a large amount of playing time because I love the event and some recaps for you guys. So hopefully I will still be able to put out videos. I definitely want to. But yeah, I will catch you guys then. Until then, this is Ike was out, and I hope you have an absolutely fantastic Gauntlet.